Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa and I'm the owner of seasonandserveblog.com. We recently completed a garden makeover project this spring and we expanded our garden bed so that we have lots more space to grow fruits and vegetables. But with a larger area to grow food comes extra maintenance, including watering, and watering by hand takes up a lot of time. So in order to save our time and also save water, we decided to install a drip irrigation system. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how we set up our drip irrigation in our garden beds from start to finish. I'll show you all the materials and tools that we used, as well as how we put everything together. Plus at the end, I'll share a little bit about how it's working so far. So if you want to see how we did our garden bed irrigation, just keep on watching. We began with a trip to Lee Valley, which is a gardening store here in Canada that sells irrigation equipment. We picked up their row garden watering kit as it was more economical to buy the kit as opposed to buying all the other pieces separately. Next, I'll show you all the pieces that came in the kit plus the extras that we needed to buy. Here is all of the supplies that we're going to use for our irrigation. There is quite a bit, so I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we're using. First off, to bring the water to where we need to go, we have some header hose, and this doesn't have any holes in it. It just basically transports the water from the tap to our beds. And then once we get to the beds, we use another type of hose called a dripper hose or an emitter hose. And as you can see, there's little holes in it. So the water just kind of drips out of that. And there's spacing every foot basically. Hopefully you can hear me. There's lots of construction going on today. Over here we have a hose cutter. It is really difficult to cut this on its own, so you have to use like a special tool to do it. So we have that. And then if we want to add extra holes into this drip hose for some reason, we have a little hole punch and we can give some plants some more water when we need it. So that is great. And then the whole system is going to be on a timer, so David is going to figure out how to use this, and we'll set that up to come on at a certain time of day, and we don't have to worry about coming out and watering every day, which is super nice. And then most importantly, to start off the whole system, we have a special brass faucet to hook up to the faucet coming out of our house, and this will allow us to run it on 2 zones with the 2 holes coming out of it. So that is really important to have, and the brass is really nice to have. It's really high quality, and you probably just have to buy this once and never again. To make sure that your drip tubing doesn't explode, you have to use a pressure regulator here, and this is the one that we needed based on our calculations for that, so 25 psi's. So that is helpful, always good to have that. And then here we have a backflow preventer, so this basically will stop any dirt from coming, back up through the tubing into the faucet, so it'll keep the water nice and clean and we won't have any clogs. So that is good. And then once we run all of the tubing, we're going to connect it with a bunch of these little elbows and T's. So we have that to connect everything. We also have some smaller little L's as well to connect the hose. And then in case we make a mistake for any reason, we have hole plugs as well. So this will just plug up any holes that we put into the tubing potentially with this. I don't think they'll fit in here, but any major big holes that we do with this, we can plug them up with this. So that is good. And then to keep all of the drip tubing tacked down where we want it, I got these little garden stakes just so it holds the hose down and doesn't like fly off anywhere. And then finally, this is a little something extra, but to turn off water to each separate little garden bed, we got these individual shutoff valves. And I think this is going to be really great, especially for the fall months, because I know I'll have some beds with plants still growing in it, but it's not going to be everywhere. So I'll be able to shut off water to certain beds when I need to, and yeah, that'll be good, saving water. And then all we did to figure out the instructions and everything, we got these 2 little pamphlets from Lee Valley, and it basically walks you through all the steps of how to set up your irrigation and stuff. So we just basically followed all these steps, and it was super easy, really like simple to understand, and there was not too much math involved, which is nice. Here is our plan for our raised beds. So our water source is actually over here. We're going to run header hose up this way and across this way, and then we're going to bring it into each individual bed. And we're kind of do an S sort of pattern to make sure every little spot gets some. We're also going to run it into the herb garden there, and then we have a flower bed on the side. We're going to run that in there as well. So our water source comes out of the house right under our deck. David is disconnecting all the existing hoses, and we're basically going to run it under here. We're going to dig a hole and trench the line and bring it up to this corner bed. And we're going to snake all the drip tubing inside each of these beds and just connect the whole system. And surprisingly, this whole area will run on one zone with all 5 of these beds, or 6 of these beds with the garden bed back there, all hooked up. So that is really great. I'm very happy that it'll be a lot easier to run on one zone. And then we do have an existing second zone. Over here we have another cut flower garden that has not drip tubing, but these little sprayers that come out. So this is on the second zone, and it also goes under the grass and along our berry beds. We're also going to run it to our existing raised bed here, and basically we're just going to branch it off from the edge of this bed, bring it across and up into here, because in here we're going to do a lot of like squashes and beans, and we have onions and garlic growing. Unfortunately, all this has to still come out, but we're going to have lots of stuff in here as well. And again, this will all be on the first zone here. Hopefully it'll work. We did the calculations, and according to our little pamphlet, it should work. So we shall see. Very exciting. We began by laying out all the plastic tubing that we needed for our garden project, and this was to help it really uncoil and become more flexible so that we could place it in the beds a lot easier. The whole system begins by attaching a shutoff valve to the spout coming out of your house. We got this brass one that's shaped like a Y, so we could attach the timer on one side and the hose on another side. And then we attach the timer to one side of the brass valve. Next, we added a pressure regulator, a backflow preventer, as well as a coupler for adding tubing directly onto the timer. And since we have a dual zone timer, there are 2 little spouts, so we did this process on both sides. And then we decided to take everything off and switch it to the left side of the Y brass connector, just so that we could attach a hose on our right side. Then we began by cutting the tubing, and the hose cutter made everything super easy. So we cut the tubing to fit, and then we screwed everything together. And before we went any further, we did a quick water check to make sure nothing was leaking, and we did find a small leak. So we ended up adding on some clamps around the ends of the hose just so that the water won't come out. And this worked perfectly, and the only water that we saw coming out of the system after that was actually from the backflow preventer, which meant it was doing its job. Once the main system was set up, we decided to lay out the rest of our materials. We laid out all of our header hose that will transport our water to our flower beds, and then all the different parts that we need to connect everything together. So we have some T connectors, some L connectors, and a plug that'll stop the water from coming out at the end of each of the garden beds. And then before we began connecting everything, we went around and placed all the connectors in the beds where we needed them. And then we got to attaching everything to the system. We began by attaching the header hose to the hose that was hooked up to our timer system. And we needed a coupler for this because the header hose that we're using to bring water to all the beds is only 1/2 inch, whereas our old hose was 5/8 inch. So you need a little coupler to bring those sizes down together. And then we attached a T connector to the header hose that will allow us to split the water off into 2 different directions according to our garden plan. Since our garden beds are so tall, we decided to add a T connector at the base of each garden bed. And this allows us to add a piece of header hose directly up the side of each of our garden beds. Then we added an L-shaped connector to the top of this piece of header hose, from which we will attach our drip tubing that will go directly into our garden beds. And after that section was done, all we did was attach the header hose to the other side of the T connector at the base of the garden bed, and then ran it along where we needed the header hose to go. Then to make everything look neat and tidy, we decided to bury our header hose underground, and this will still allow it to transport water from one area to another, and we just don't have to see it. So it's kind of there unseen, but also still doing its job. Also didn't bury it that deep, maybe 1.5 to 2 inches at most. And then once the header hose was brought to our second garden bed, we did the same process by attaching a T-connector at the bottom, bringing another piece of header hose up to the top of the garden bed, and then attaching a little L-shaped connector to allow us to attach the drip tubing at the top of this garden bed. Then after that, we basically continued this process for each of the garden beds. But after each time that we attached a new garden bed to the system, we did a little test to make sure that there was no leaks and that water was actually getting through the header hose into the garden beds. As an additional bonus, we decided to add some valves to the top of each of the garden beds, and this will allow us to turn water on and off to each of the beds depending on what's growing at the time. And then we attached the drip tubing to the end of the valve and then laid the drip tubing within the garden bed where we wanted it. I made a garden plan earlier on this spring and I knew exactly where all of my plants were going to go this season, so I made sure that the drip tubing went to all the areas where the plants would be and that it was long enough to reach all of them. And to secure the drip tubing into the garden bed, all we did was insert galvanized stakes along the length of the drip tubing just so that it could bend into the shape and lay flat within the garden bed itself. Overall, we found the installation process to be really simple and pretty intuitive to connect all the parts together. The system has been working really great so far, and I'm excited to use it throughout the summer. This has saved a lot of time with watering as our garden area is very large and we have other garden beds to tend to as well. We thought this drip system was really great because the water goes directly into the soil and doesn't get on your plants so that they don't get wet and cause any mildew or diseases. Plus, it conserves a lot of water and reduces evaporation. And setting everything up on a timer to go off for a certain length of time on certain days is absolutely amazing. The timer is also really intuitive to use, and even I figured it out. So if I can do it, you guys can do it as well. Overall, I highly recommend installing this drip irrigation system in your garden, especially if it's really large and if you're really busy and can't water it every day, and also if you're interested in conserving water. To stay updated on how the irrigation system performs over the upcoming summer and fall months, make sure you hit the red subscribe button down below to see more videos from me, as well as videos on how my garden progresses over the season. You can find more gardening articles as well as recipes from the garden on my blog and my Instagram account, so make sure you go ahead and follow me there as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.